Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Vosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
Today's guest is Linda Wisniewski.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
We're going.
Okay. Welcome everybody out there to Books and Brews, episode 38. And just so everybody else out there knows, in case we sound weird, this is our third start. User error, technical error.
So third time's a charm. And Linda was just saying, maybe it has to do with getting comfortable here. That full moon the other night. Speaking of which, I assume all of you saw the eclipse.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. The blood
Wasn't
moon.
that something?
Yeah, that was beautiful. I went outside and looked at it, and it got me thinking. So we marvel all the time about like the Aztecs and whatnot, all these ancient civilizations and the knowledge they had of astronomy and the movement of the planets and the stars and all that. And I just thought, looking at it, it's like, well, they lived with it. Mm-hmm. We don't anymore. We don't live with it at all because we're indoors. We've got electric lighting. All that stuff is like special. We see the eclipse of the moon. It's like this huge event. But they lived with all that. Of course, they had knowledge of it.
Well, and they had to, even for navigating things like that. We were driving. I'm trying to think. We were coming home from my stepdaughter's graduation. And all of a sudden, Chris pointed it out. And we only had our phones to take pictures with, and it wasn't working. So, it's a 2-hour drive home. It was still going by the time we got back. And so I took pictures. I got it kind of at the height where it was fully eclipsed. And then I took pictures like every 5 minutes as it gradually became bright again.
Wow, nice.
Yeah. So you said you took pictures of it?
I did not take any pictures. I just went outside and looked at it.
By the way, did you notice that there was either a comet or a shooting star too?
No.
Yeah, where we were, it was really weird. It was like this long string of lights. It looked like a whole bunch of individual little lights in a long string. And
we know the House of Representatives today had their first UFO hearing in 50 years.
Yeah, I saw that.
Well, there you go. I should have been there. I'm kind of laughing because, Chris said it was there too long to be a shooting star, but it wasn't there long enough to be a comet. And that was what I said. Well, I guess it must have been those little lights along the edge of the UFO then. And my picture of that didn't come out either. So it's the pictures of UFOs. It's like vampires. You can't take pictures. Yeah, they just don't come out. That's why we have to fake them, right? So, we've been so kind of discombobulated by all the parts. We're going to sound totally like, we're faking it when we go, how was your month? And you hear for the time.
My month is good, Laura. How was yours?
But for the sake of our
I wish you all out there could have heard, because the first run through was fantastic.
It was so spontaneous.
It was so good.
And the second run through was less spontaneous. The one's going to be like, I am so effing tired of saying this. You know how my month was.
So anyway, I just want to know about the banjo.
Yes. So apart from the graduations, the track meets, the Mother's Day, we had a dog sitter, so we were able to go to the thrift stores in Stillwater. And we actually went, and this part is spontaneous. You haven't heard this twice already. Isn't this exciting? We actually went to buy stained glass windows because, as you know, I'm living in a house of glass now, so I'm no allowed to throw stones. But we wanted to put up some stained glass in some of this expanse we have. And we thought that would be a great place to get it because stained glass can be pretty expensive.
Yeah.
And we found 2. We actually found 3 that were just beautiful, but we limited ourselves to only 2. And in the process of looking for the stained glass is when we found a banjo. And so, in fact, there were 3 banjos. One of them was a 6-string.
Oh,
Yeah.
6-string.
So, yeah. Have you ever, I'm guessing you haven't tried a 6-string?
I haven't played one, but I have seen one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we're on par with you then. We've seen, and Chris was kind of thinking of getting it just because they're not that common. But then, like, yeah, I don't know how to play banjo. I'm just starting. So he got, I don't actually know. I think it's a 5-string that he got.
Mm-hmm. That's
and so then, yeah, I didn't know 4 or 5 was, that's one thing I've never attempted to play. But he immediately asked, so how's Michael doing on banjo?
I'm doing good. I started to tell you before when everybody froze up with our technical errors, the last run through, that banjo, so just so he knows, since he plays a million instruments, he probably will pick it up relatively quickly, but it's a really hard instrument to learn how to play. And it's also a notoriously difficult instrument to keep set. So there are people whose profession it is to, quote, set up a banjo.
And that's what I was curious about. I think I was just asking when we froze up, does that include putting the strings on, tuning? Are there other things that happen?
No, they're everything. So the bridge is a floating bridge. So you have to get it set just right, or your intonation is all off. The head, the drum head, if you want to call it that, the head has to be tightened and adjusted so that it's even. And the neck, you have to make sure the neck isn't like bent one way or the other from neck tension. There's just all these things setting up a banjo that if it's not set up properly, it's a disaster.
So do you do all these things yourself, or do you have some?
Oh, hell no.
Okay, no.
No, my new banjo came set up.
Oh, fantastic. And string instruments traveling through the mail, I can see that, heat or cold or whatever would mess up the tuning anyway.
Well, the tuning, banjos are also notoriously difficult to keep in tune.
So they're like the oboe of the string world.
Yeah, they go out of tune like all the time. And there are numerous jokes about banjo tuning. So one that I heard at a show, a banjo player told this joke. He said, what's worse than 2 banjos trying to get into tune?
What?
Nothing.
I was waiting for, this on the oboes or something. That's pretty bad if even oboes come out above banjos. So what have you been reading this month?
Nothing.
Been
wedding planning, just wedding planning.
Well, I've, because you've got that coming up. You've got a lot there.
Like pretty much exactly a month.
I thought so, yeah, because what is it, June 15th?
18th.
That was my second guess. Yeah, I got married. Actually, I've gotten married 3 times and done no planning. Twice. This sounds worse than it is. My first husband and I got married in a civil ceremony in Ireland, which his mother planned, that and the dinner and everything. Then while I was in Ireland, my mother planned the church wedding. So I did absolutely nothing. And I'm probably the only female in the world who was quite happy with not planning my own wedding. So, I've been reading my book, Saint in the Cellar, because I'm reading through it 500 times, proofreading before it's released. And I've been reading books on herbs, I mispronounced that badly, and all about chickens and goats and composting.
Well, that sounds like fascinating stuff.
Yep. And, third time around, the joke about composting and shit. So I'm not going to make it.
Everybody out there, you're just missing all the fun.
I know. Right. It's too bad we don't have, the blooper really.
Oh,
But
who's our guest, Laura?
well, we are on
What's going on with
episode
this?
number 38. And today we have Linda Wisniewski, who is a former librarian and journalist who lives in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. She has been published in Toasted Cheese, Hippocampus, Foliate Oak, and other literary magazines. She also has authored a memoir called Off Quilter, A Woman's Journey to Peace with Scoliosis, her mother, and her Polish heritage. I've grown up in some areas with lots of people with Polish heritage. That's a big thing. And she blogs at lindawis.com. I'm assuming it's called that because you assume nobody can spell Wisniewski.
That's right. Even I have trouble.
So, Michael, we are ready for our first beer.
All right, first beer. So just a disclaimer out there. The right beers for all of these readings are beers that are not available in Minnesota. So I have a beer in front of me, but it has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about for any of the three paired beers today.
Can you tell what I have in front of me?
That looks like cider or wine.
I think it might be Moscato, although I figured Polish had to include some sort of a dark beer.
It does not, actually.
Really? Okay.
No.
Well, I learned something today.
All right.
Anyway, I did beer for the occasion too.
So our first beer actually is available. It's made in Minneapolis, but it's a sometimes tap room only offering, so it isn't available right now. And it is a beer from Fair State Brewing in Minneapolis that is called Oh My Grods.
Oh my what?
Grods, Grodz. So
I can see why you picked that.
It is a Grodziski, which is a historic Polish style. So in the beer world now, there's this big interest in styles that went extinct. Because beer styles, like clothing styles, they go out of style and people stop drinking them and people stop making them. So Grodziski is a beer style that was brewed in Poland starting in the earliest record of it is in the 1200s. And in the 1960s, I think I read, the last brewery making it stopped making it because nobody wanted to drink it anymore.
That's very interesting. So do they know how authentic this is that you would have gotten if it was available today?
I mean, there are records of there are descriptions of what it was like. The thing that you can't do, it was brewed commonly with two different yeasts, and neither of those yeast strains are available.
Really?
So,
why not?
Because the brewery stopped making it. So these strains just
Why
went away
not?
unless somebody has cultures hidden away somewhere.
Okay, I guess I don't know that much about how yeast works, especially yeast in beer. So
But it is so Grodziski is a smoked wheat beer. So it's made with wheat malt and it uses oak smoked malt. And it's described early on, all the descriptions of it describe it as being intensely smoky, with some yeast character that I'm not certain what that yeast character was, but very dry, very clean, highly effervescent, so very fizzy. My idea with this pairing was to go with this first reading, a thing out of time and place. So one, it's Polish, and two, it is a style that died but has been revived. So it is a beer style that's out of time and place.
Oh, I love that. What was the name of it again? What was the Polish name?
Grodziski?
Can you
I'm
spell
probably
it?
not saying that right.
Spell it for me.
Hang on, I gotta pull up my file here so I'm actually looking. Grodziski.
Grodziskie.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try
it. It's named after the town where it was first.
Grodziskia.
Yeah.
Grodziskia, yeah.
I said I probably wasn't pronouncing it correctly.
Well, you were pronouncing it with an American accent, so
Yeah, right, there you go.
we'll let that
So
go.
is that what you're drinking now?
Oh, no, I'm drinking a Scotch ale.
So can I get this? Would I be able to get this?
You wouldn't be able to get the one that I mentioned, but several craft breweries around the country brew one on occasion. It's
Okay.
become I wouldn't call it a popular style, but it is a style that brewers at least are interested in. I don't know how interested consumers are, but brewers at least are interested in it, so they make it on occasion.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I can see, that people want to know how people lived in the past. There is an interest in that. So I don't know if you know, but my dog, an Irish Wolfhound, was actually recreated. The breed nearly died out. And so I do sometimes wonder how accurate what we have today is to what it was based on. But Linda, we are ready for your first reading.
Okay, I'm ready to read. I think I'm going to put some Wisniewski in my next book.
Excellent idea.
Okay, so I'd like to read to you a couple of pages from the very first beginning of my book, which is called Where the Stork Flies. It's a time travel novel that goes from the present back to 1825 in what is now Poland. At the time, it was just part of the Austrian Empire. So this is from chapter 1. The winter Regina arrived, I had a lot on my mind. My part-time job at the public library was going nowhere. My husband had left me over a crazy misunderstanding, and our 19-year-old daughter, who had always favored him, blamed me and followed him out the door. Lonely and confused by the turn my life had taken, I stumbled into the kitchen that morning and found the back door standing open, letting in a few flakes of snow. Get a grip. I slammed the door closed. A whimper came from behind me. I whirled around to see an old woman in a long brown skirt, loose white blouse, and a muslin headscarf. She stood beside my kitchen table, shivering. A scream escaped my throat and then hers, both of us yelling like a crazy banshee duet. Who the hell are you? She jumped back, knocking over a chair. Celine, my old gray kitty, meowed loudly and ran from the room. What do you want? I shouted as she scuttled over to a corner, clutching a piece of cheese. Her wide eyes looked so terrified, I felt for a second as if I were the intruder, not she. Her face was wrinkled parchment, and her hair around the edges of her headscarf was gray. But her round cheeks, those small brown eyes above a long, straight nose, I had seen them before, on my grandmother's face. A woman who raised me from the age of 10. A woman who had died over 30 years before. It was her, and not her. A queasy little wave traveled through my stomach. Who are you? I said again, my voice shaking. I wondered if she was some sort of hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. My hands groped for the back of a chair. She licked dry lips and held out both trembling hands, still clutching the cheese. Przepraszam pani, she pleaded. Proszę mi wybaczyć. A wave of pity flooded my heart. Her voice was soft and hoarse, and though I didn't understand her words, I knew their rhythm, the pattern of her sentence, the rise and fall in cadence. She spoke Polish like my babcia, and my mind responded with words from my childhood to ask what she was doing. Co ty robisz? The old woman's lips trembled. Pani mi wybaczyć, she whispered and waved the cheese in her hands, still begging forgiveness as her gaze darted around the room, as if she was expecting punishment to come from some corner. I didn't know how to say, relax, it's okay. So I grabbed another phrase from my childhood, the one that meant hello. Dzień dobry, my name is Catherine. I pointed at my chest where my heart thumped a jagged rhythm. Katarzyna. She nodded and positioned her feet on the floor as if ready to run. Her iron grip on the big hunk of Jarlsberg told me she wouldn't give it up without a fight. I had to let her know I would never take it from her. I'm sorry, I said, softening my tone. I don't speak Polish very well. Do you speak English? Her only response was a shaky smile that made me want to put my arms around her. All the while I had been thinking of calling the cops, but my gut instinct told me she meant no harm. I looked from her to the door and back again. searching for a clue to my next move. We couldn't stay there forever, staring at each other. I had to step up and take charge. Deep breath, Kat. I picked up the overturned chair and gestured an invitation to sit. Then exhaling, I sank into a chair myself.
I really enjoyed hearing this, to hear the pronunciation of the Polish words. And I know that a lot of this comes somewhat from your family background. Did you also grow up speaking some Polish?
Yes, it does come from my background. I actually went to a Polish school from kindergarten through the 8th grade. And although we were taught, they taught us, we were taught in English, but they taught us some Polish words. And I know a lot of prayers and Christmas carols in Polish.
Nice. Okay. No, in your memoir, I actually read the intro to your memoir that is available on Amazon. And you talk in that about looking at your face in the mirror and seeing both your mother and your grandmother's face looking back at you. And I noticed that a few times, and I should mention too, that we actually have a full hour, I think it's an hour interview that I did with you about a year ago on Step Into a Story, if anyone wants to hear more about your story. But so I have read the whole book. And you talk a few times in there about noticing the similarity in features as Kat looks at her ancestors, and she meets more than just Regina, the old lady in her kitchen. And I was curious, when I saw that connection, was that deliberate, taking that experience of looking in the mirror yourself and seeing your mother?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. It was deliberate, and yeah, I've had that experience many times, and I think many women have, especially you get to be a certain age and you go, whoa.
But that's really interesting you say that, because actually I never have. I've never looked in the mirror and seen my mother.
Okay.
Maybe that's why it jumped out at me, and it was actually, how deliberate that was for an experience.
Yeah.
But this story ends up being a story about family connections and how this family is connected across time. Why did you want to bring out this connection that Kat and her ancestors have? And why do you think that's important in today's world where, we tend to move, we don't tend to stick close to our family as much?
Mm-hmm. Well, the inspiration for the book came from a family tree that I saw a few years before I started writing at a family reunion. And one of my cousins who lives in Switzerland had gone over to Poland and researched the family history, and she found a lot of information. And as we were at this party looking at it, my cousins and I at the family tree, I noticed that the earliest ancestor was a woman named Regina, who was born in 1778. And we started talking about, what would she think of our lives today? Wow, we have it so much better, don't we? Than she could possibly have had. We don't know anything about her, but we know it must have been bad. She was a pet. We know she was a peasant. We're pretty sure about that, based on the people who came over after her. They lived on farms. And in doing my research, I found that actually they were serfs. She was a serf, and worked on a noble's property. So I think, it's important to just be cognizant of that. If you can find out where you came from, whose shoulders you're standing on. And also it was a personal journey for me when I was writing the book, because I set out to write her story and how she was going to see how much better it's going to be in the 21st century for women. And as I was writing the book, it turned out to be the modern woman's story, because she had to go back and look at Regina's life and see there were things about it that she really appreciated and missed in the modern world. So it became a first-person story in the voice of Kat, the modern woman. And it was her change, her internal change, that drove the plot of the book.
Right. And that's, you may have kind of stolen my thunder for questions I had coming up, but, hey, I'm a jazz musician, right? Actually, I haven't been for years, so I can't improv anymore. However, Michael, we're ready for beer number 2.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Beer number 2. So this one isn't actually a beer at all. This one is a mead. No, wait. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm getting confused about the order of the readings here, but I have this right.
We're on the second reading.
Yeah. I was just confused about which one was the second reading, but this is right. This is from St. Ambrose Cellars in Beulah, Michigan. And again, it is not available in Minnesota, so I do not have it here in front of me, and I have never had it. This is called the Mysterious Black Madonna. It is a sour blackberry mead.
Wow.
That they serve on draft, which is unusual for a mead. Usually meads are in a big bottle. So mead is a honey wine, basically. So this is one that includes blackberries. I can't tell you anything more about it. But it seems appropriate.
Recently, I had blackberry mead at Easter. So there is a place in Cambridge, Minnesota that makes it and sells it.
And was it good?
It was a little tart for my taste. I like the honey mead better, but you know, it was mead, so.
I'm not a fan of mead myself.
Oh, I love it.
I don't think I've ever had it, but we have a farmer's market here that sells mead. And I'm going to go on Saturday and tell this guy to order some of this mysterious
That's
black
great.
Madonna.
A few weeks before Easter, a couple of my sons were here with a couple of their friends, including one who had been in the Marines and one who's a bailiff in town here. And they had never had mead. And my son had given me a huge bottle of it for Christmas. So we're like, you've got to try mead. You've got to try it. And they were like, wow, this is so good. We ended up polishing off the whole bottle of mead. And my son and daughter-in-law were like, they drank all your mead? I had to confess, no, that wasn't quite how it was. I helped. But they did really like it. So, Linda, we are ready for chapter 16 of Where the Stork Flies. Before you start, could you actually explain the significance of the stork in the title?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. So the stork is a very important figure in Polish folklore. They are said to have magical powers. They bring you good luck, especially if they build a nest on top of your house. I did see their nest when I was in Poland in 2010. They have these huge nests, as you can imagine, because storks are very big birds. And they build the nests on top of these communist era concrete telephone poles. So they're like 6-foot nests. Wow. And they're just huge. And it's just such a beautiful thing to see them, rise up out of the nest and fly away. So the stork, when they spend the winter in North Africa, so in the early fall, they all fly back, thousands of storks to North Africa. In the early spring, they fly north to Poland and start building their nests. So if you go on social media, Polish social media, in early spring, you'll see all kinds of pictures. People are all happy and excited that the storks are coming back, kind of like when the swallows come back to Capistrano, the storks come back to Poland. So I put the stork in my book because I like that legend, and I wanted to have a little bit more magic in the book. It's a magical realism story, so it takes place in the real world, but there are touches of magic throughout. So right, the stork, like time travel. And the stork is a sort of a guide for Kat as she's having some problems in Poland. The stork helps her get out of a couple of jams. And so that, and also the significance of having the stork in the title is that Poland is the land where the stork flies, the land of my ancestors. So okay. I titled it Where the Stork Flies.
Fantastic. Go ahead with reading number 2.
Okay, reading number 2 from chapter 16. So in this chapter, Kat and Regina are trying to figure out a way to get her back home where she belongs. They're in the 21st century in Pennsylvania. Regina could not sit still. She stood and poked at my side with her finger. Feel okay? Take a little rest. Go on internet for ideas. All right, just let me get centered here. I feel a little dizzy. I walked over to my corner altar, touched the purple cloth, and picked up a soft, flat stone. As always, its coolness soothed me as I stroked its surface with my thumb. Regina scurried upstairs and came back carrying my laptop in front of her like a serving tray. Go on internet, please, need more ideas. I took it from her with a sigh and set it on the table. This time when I searched, a link at the bottom of the screen caught my attention. Marvels, Mechanics, and Mysteries of Life on Earth. Clicking on the title, I browsed through the strangest combination of subjects I had ever encountered online or in print. Aviation, contradictions, fantasy, spiritual beings, unicorns, and time slips. Time slips could mean time travel. Regina leaned in closer and stared wide-eyed at the screen she could not read. Listen to this, I read aloud. Persons might travel through time by means of a portal. Okay, we got that right, I went on. These places of extreme high energy exist all over the earth. To travel to the same portal at different times in history, one must find a place very similar to the place left behind. Regina's gaze went to my altar shelf on the wall. I pictured tiny wheels turning inside her head as she thought for several minutes in silence. Then she spoke. Altar in here, same idea as my shrine, yes? But Kasha backyard, not same as Mawa Wonka shrine, except grass and trees. After another minute, she threw her hands in the air. Ask people from Big Church. Find porthole in those people village. It's portal, not porthole. Never mind. Even if she was picking up words from Love Boat reruns, she was on the right track. I didn't need to correct her every minute. Regina, the people we saw at the shrine don't live in a village. They live all over Bucks County in houses like this one. Where would I find a place that resembled her Wonka? Wait a minute. I did indeed know of a place that just might fit the bill. It wasn't a village, but it was a close-knit community filled with Polish people, the Port Richmond neighborhood in Philadelphia. We took the quickest route to the city, straight down I-95. Regina covered her eyes with one hand and peeked between her fingers as cars and trucks whizzed by. She wore the garish red skirt and yellow tunic from our trip to the mall. While I drove, she whispered, Święta Maria, and scrabbled in her skirt pocket for the crystal rosary from the shrine gift shop. She always seemed to direct her pleas to the Virgin. Maybe Regina was more of a feminist than she knew. I smiled to myself at the thought. My parallel parking skills were rusty, but I managed to jockey the car into a space on a side street off Allegheny Avenue, the main commercial thoroughfare. When I opened her door, Regina stepped onto the sidewalk, but immediately cowered against my car. Busy shoppers passed us by without a second glance. Why weren't we attracting stares the way we had in the mall? I looked around us, mostly white people in blue-collar clothing, a fair number of older women in babushkas like Regina's, young men and women in jeans and t-shirts, tired-looking adult males in forgettable clothing. Don't be afraid, no one here will hurt you. Just then, a group of teenage boys shouldered us aside and continued down the sidewalk. Regina's hands flew to her chest. The boys crossed the street, laughing back at us. I was angry, but the dirty look I gave them was a waste of time. They weren't malicious, just young and arrogant. I looked around for a place to escape the crowd.
I think that this was the reading. I was long. We had to cut some of them down because they were a little bit too long and we have such a hard limit. But this is the reading that had the mermaid in it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Really? So, I made a point of bringing our newly acquired mermaid as a, visual aid because it was in your book. And this is kind of an interesting story. We actually have a very large version of this outside.
Oh.
Its owners built a little waterfall and a little stream that trickles down to a pond. So we've got two mermaids, one of which looks pretty much like this, except not blue, sitting on either side of this waterfall. But tell us about the significance of the mermaid as it is in this scene, if we had the time to read just a little bit further.
Well, the mermaid is actually in a restaurant where they go. She goes to find a place for her to get out of the crowd and sit down. And the mermaid is a patron of the city of Warsaw, actually.
Really?
Which is kind of interesting because Warsaw is on a river. And so it's kind of a weird anachronism. But in that restaurant, and this is a real restaurant in the Port Richmond neighborhood in Philadelphia, and there is a huge painting, sort of a mural of the mermaid on the wall.
That's very fascinating. Now, you really bring out in this book that, and you mentioned it earlier, even today, that we today kind of look down on those of the past, and we think they're illiterate and they're not very forward thinking. They might even not be a bit too bright. And Kat has to catch herself a couple of times. Again, one of the scenes that I think we cut down, but originally the full length that we're going to read had where, what's her name? Regina, kind of puts her foot down. I think it was this scene, and says, I'm not going further until you tell me what's going on. And Kat has to catch herself. Oh yeah, I'm treating her child again. And in my own research, because I write time travel, of course, I came to believe that we're always told how oppressed medieval women were and how awful their lives were. They had no rights, blah, blah, blah. The more I read, the more I thought, it wasn't quite like that. But, and you yourself, it sounds like as you researched, you came to think that maybe Kat has something to learn. What was the turning point, or what was it that you read or learned that made you think maybe we have something to learn from them too?
Well, one of the things was that she was abused by her husband, Regina.
Regina was, right.
Yeah, and so were quite a few of the women in the village. And I'm pretty sure that was a thing back then. Unfortunately, it's still a thing, but not quite as compressed in the same towns. But it was much more acceptable for them at the time. And so I had Regina and her friends band together and take some agency in their lives as women. And I believe that they probably could have done that. I think that was realistic. And they got together and basically took this one guy down in the village and pinned him to the floor. And so I think, just looking at what they had to do all day, how hard they worked, how they had really no spare time, but they managed somehow to have friendships and to know about each other and help each other when there was a need in the village or in the families, and how they appreciated nature and the beauty of, how close they lived with the animals and how they depended on them. So all these things made Kat realize, and I guess me in the process of writing it, the beauty of a simple life that we forget sometimes. We were talking earlier with Michael about the lunar eclipse and how we have to learn about it from the TV or the internet so we can go outside and find out that it's happening and see it,
Right.
And back then, as he said, it was just part of their lives, the phases of the moon and things that they saw. So just, appreciating, Kat isn't really me. It's a novel and it's fiction, but she embodies a lot of my personal philosophy. And I think that's true of most fiction writers. We put our dreams, maybe our spiritual beliefs into our stories, things that we think are important for people to read about and think about and know. So I feel very strongly that her spirituality and her friends, the power of women's friendship, which is still true today.
Right. And I think you're very right about that. I've often thought, as I was raising my children, now they're mostly raised now, but during the years they were all at home, I often thought my grandmother in some ways worked much harder than I did. She had to do the laundry basically by hand with a big wringer that you could catch your arm in and rip it off in. And, my life was so easy compared to hers, except there was no opportunity to have friendships. She and her friends would do their work all morning and then they'd get together and play cards in the afternoon. And they had this rhythm and this, really peace and contentment that no, life was not easy. It could be very hard, but it was hard in a very different way. And they had some things that we don't. And I really wish that more people would look at that and realize we have improved some things, but we've lost others.
Exactly. Yeah.
To learn. Michael, we are ready for beer number 3, and I can't
All
wait.
right. Beer number 3. This is a beer that used to be available in the Twin Cities, but no longer is, much to my dismay. So when I read the readings, I always go through first and I just write down words, basically just words of images that come to mind as I'm reading a particular reading. So with this, I wrote historic farmstead, livestock, wood fire, rustic. And so I needed a beer that would reflect that. And I turned to the obvious style, which I have turned to numerous times on this in this podcast, of Saison, which is a Belgian style. It's a farmhouse ale that harkens back to the olden days when people drank beer instead of water, because water would kill you, or at least make you sick. But one I picked, I think is particularly appropriate. It's from Brasserie de Blangy in Belgium. And it's another word it's another beer name that I'm going to mispronounce, I'm sure. Saison de Poitre, because I don't speak French.
How do you spell that?
D'(EPEAUTRE).
You lost me somewhere in the vowel.
It's French.
It's French, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's from the French-speaking section of Belgium.
Okay.
And it is a Saison that is brewed with spelt, which is an heirloom kind of, it's a type of wheat. It is a very rustic ale, very highly carbonated. It's got a little bit of what we would call barnyard funkiness to it. Spicy, peppery, citrusy, bitter and dry. It's delicious, and I haven't had it in years and years and years.
Horrible to me.
Yeah, you wouldn't like it, Laura.
I don't know about bitter and dry, but I like citrusy.
Yeah.
That just sounds horrible to me. Linda, we are ready for reading number 3.
Okay. Reading number 3 is taken from a chapter near the end of the book. And this is a scene where Regina, our cat, has arrived finally in Regina's hometown, this little village of Malawonka. And she's pretending she's a long lost relative of Regina's who needs shelter. This is the story that they're giving the villagers. So she's staying in her house, in her cottage. It wasn't easy to sleep that first night. I'm sure I was the last person in the house to close my eyes. Pavel and Regina snored. Anna woke up crying several times, and Regina and Monica got up to comfort her. I wanted to help, but was too unsettled and unsure to move from my bed. Finally, exhaustion set in. The next thing I heard was Regina's voice a few feet away. When I sat up, I saw Monica's silhouette in the dim morning light as she went outside carrying a big pitcher. A snuffly noise came from behind the house, and I tiptoed to look out the window. A small goat and 2 sheep grazed behind a fence. A shaggy brown dog wandered across the yard and stopped before 8-year-old Sophia. I went out the door to join her. I asked her the dog's name in Polish. So far, so good. She tenderly stroked its brown fur. Piotr, she whispered without looking up. Behind me, I heard a masculine chuckle and turned to see her brother Franciszek, a blond boy of about 7. She gives the dog a boy's name. He laughed again and pointed at his sister. I didn't understand his exact words, but I got the meaning from his gesture. Sophia pushed her equally blonde hair behind one ear and stuck out her tongue at him. It's a good name, I said in Polish. I like it. Sophia put her hands to her hips and stuck out her chin. See, Franciszek, Pani says Piotr is a good name for a dog. Let's get some breakfast, I said, suddenly nervous about continuing in my halting Polish. I didn't want to start an argument my first morning here. Where's the kitchen? The kids stared at me, round-eyed, then followed me back into the house. Regina sat on Anna's bed, brushing the child's hair. Her gentle rhythmic motions lulled Anna into a peaceful little smile, my smile. Even her hair was mine as a kid, blonde and fine. What was in that herbal drink her mother had given her? It had worked faster than my flu medicine back in the 21st century. She looked a lot better than the night before, her cheeks a light pink, her eyes clear. Thank you, I whispered to the universe. Matka Boska answers prayers, Regina said in Polish. How was it I could understand her so well? A flash of heat came over me just before I smelled roses. I looked around for Jadwiga. Was that a flash of green silk at the window? With a knowing look, Regina told me she believed healing Anna was a miracle from the Black Madonna. Would the tea have done the trick if someone else had made it? If Regina were still in Pennsylvania? I had no idea. I wished I had brought my goddess cards so I could consult them. Regina looked over at me. You were hungry after your long journey, she said with a grin. Relaxed and at home, her sense of humor had returned. And though I understood, mine was still somewhere back in the future. I pieced together some Polish words to say I wasn't hungry and that Anna looked exactly like my kindergarten picture, and that I was extremely relieved she was better. Naprawdę? She smiled. It was nice, she said. We all had the same DNA, so why not? I pulled her aside so I could speak English. She doesn't just look like me. It's like looking into my own face when I was small, and it's kind of scary. Regina patted my hand like the reassuring mother she was, now that she was back here in her own time and place. No worries, she whispered. I am scared in Doylestown, but you help me. Now I help you.
That's, and I love where this goes from here. This is at the beginning of her time there, and she's there for quite a while. And that's the part of your book that I really liked, that she also is learning about Regina's time. Now, you talk in your memoir about your father and about you had a friend named Diane and her father too, that both of them kind of were prone to rages. They were prone to belittling their wives. And of course, we learned that Pavel is very much the same, that he goes into rages, he belittles his wife, yells at his children. And I find myself, I thought this was interesting to compare your memoir to your fiction. And I was thinking back to this time, I was like, 25 or something. And I let a friend read a book that I had finished writing when I was about 23. And she said, this is kind of weird that there's a college student who has absolutely no parents, like they're never mentioned at all. And I looked at my life and I went, and I know why that happened, but it wasn't conscious. And I was curious, were you very consciously saying, I want to write about my life, but in fiction? Or do you think that for you, it just sort of came out?
It was probably unconscious. I certainly didn't say I wanted to write about my life in fiction, but I wanted to write about, my ethnic heritage and what I saw, and I did see some domestic, I guess you would call it abuse, emotional abuse in my life. So I didn't set out to say I'm going to make this guy like my father, but it was an issue that I have thought about and written about for a long time. How some men treat women. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, I wanted to deal with that, and I wanted that to be resolved in a positive way.
Right. And
so, yeah, it is all tied together.
I know of situations where it's the other way around too, that some women can be not terribly nice to some men. And I've tried to ignore celebrity things, but I believe that's sort of in the news right now. But, the men in this book are at least a little bit partially abusive to women. And Regina is inspired by Kat to do something about it, especially as she and her friends, they're very used to being treated this way, but they want something better for their daughters. And so they decide to do something about that. And I wondered, as I kind of read this, what extent do you think fiction writers are really writing, working out our own demons, doing our own therapy, rewriting the world as we wish it had been, or as we wish it could be?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think you're right on. I know some fiction writers that say, oh, you're brave, you wrote a memoir, I could never do that. But then if you read their fiction, you're right, it's got a lot of their personal story in it. So, yeah, I think we do. And, we use what we see, and maybe not necessarily in our personal lives, but we see other relationships and how people handle them or don't handle them. And these are all things that come into our stories. When you go to write a story, if you want to have the person go through a certain journey and change in some way, you think of ways you've seen that happen in your life or in lives that you have observed. So you just take everything that you've seen or learned and put it into your fiction. It just reminds me, when I was in college, I majored in sociology because I was really interested in people and how they behave in groups in society. And it just sort of fascinated me. And other people who I met later in life said, well, did you ever use that degree? Because, what is it? And you didn't become a sociologist. And I said, I absolutely did, because it teaches you to look at everything in society, in your own and other societies, and see how people behave. And then when I became a librarian, that was even better, because then you get to really use everything that you've ever seen or read or heard or know. One thing a friend said when I went to library school, she said, oh, that's really great, because librarians know everything. And,
Sure.
And I, and I laughed and I said, well, we don't know, librarians don't know everything. Thank you. It's very nice to think that, but librarians know how to find out everything.
Yep.
And then when I got to actually work as a librarian, when I got my master's degree, I realized librarians really know how to start looking for everything, and then how to follow those threads. So you really use everything that you've learned, I think, up to a certain point. And I think, as you might agree with this, Laura, as a novelist, you use everything that maybe you've seen and heard at some point to throw into a story.
Yep. Yeah, bit by bit it comes out. Now, one thing I was really interested in is how you kind of open your memoir talking about how scoliosis, which you have, which I believe they didn't really know how to treat at the time, you use scoliosis as a metaphor for your life. And I guess it jumped out at me because I'm kind of working on a memoir piece. I don't know what I'll do with it, but I call it Love in a Snot Green House. And I'm using the house I lived in for 17 years. There's a reason for that. Nobody could identify what the color actually was until one of my kids said, it's kind of like snot green, like it's not green, it's not yellow, it's not white. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. It is exactly the color of snot. But I kind of use that house, and the reasons we were in that house, which was horribly inadequate for our family, as a bit of a metaphor to talk about all the other things that I really wanted to talk about in the in the memoir. And I'm kind of curious, do you think that most people have something like that in their life that sort of is symbolic?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And that's what metaphors are, aren't they? I mean, they're objects that stand for something else. And
I wonder how many people are aware of that metaphor in their lives.
Probably only us writers.
That may be a good
But what, no, it's not true. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of it, but and people say it kind of as a throwaway line. They don't realize what they're saying. They go, oh yeah, my scoliosis, boy, that's just a symbol of my life because I'm constantly having to adjust against different pains, But one of the things I learned in different writing workshops is that you have to give the reader some kind of concrete image to hold in their mind. So you're using the image of the house, and they're going to be picturing this snot green house in their minds while you describe things that are going on in the house. Whereas you could just talk about my house and my life and, whatever stories you want to tell, but they're going to picture their house or somebody else's house. So it won't be as different for them. A snot greenhouse is a very different image. Scoliosis is a pretty common image, but I wanted to use that metaphor because I thought it was a great way to tie in the struggle that I had to try to become myself, who I really was, and, push against the different forces that I had in my life. So one of my teachers enforced that it's a good way to end even a short piece of writing, to leave the reader with a concrete image in their mind.
That's great advice. We are pretty much out of time. And so, Linda, can you give our, I believe we're up to something like 6.5 million listeners. And that's a very scientifically based number that I drew from my imagination. And should be.
Algorithms. It's algorithms.
It's all algorithms, right? In fact, I can tell by the lack of comments on our YouTube videos. I know we have none because they're all afraid of clogging up the channel because there are so many of them. They're just people. And that is how I know we have 6.5 million listeners.
Okay.
So Linda, can you tell our 6.5 million listeners where to find you online?
Sure. Well, first, the best place would be on my website, lindawis.com. Because that has links to my podcast interviews and some of my recent writing, and I have a blog on that website. You can also find me on Facebook under Linda C. Wisniewski Writer. You can find me on Instagram, same thing, Linda C. Wisniewski. And what else? I'm on Twitter. My handle is at Linda WIS. Let's see, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I think that's it. I have one TikTok video, but.
All right. I have 0, so you're ahead of me. Michael, where can we find you and where can we find us?
I am at aperfectpint.net and aperfectpint on the non-existent socials. We are at booksandbrews.net, Book and Brews on Instagram, and Books and Brews with Laura Wosika and Michael Agnew on Facebook. Where are you?
I am at lauravosika.com. I also have my publishing company at gabrielswarnpress.com. There is a Twitter account for Gabriel Sworn Books right now, and I have no clue what the handle is. You can find me at laura.vosika.author at Facebook. And I think that's everything. Upcoming events. Linda, do you have anything coming up?
I do, but it's a local event. If anyone is near Norristown, Pennsylvania, on June 12th, I'm appearing on a panel with some other authors.
Okay. And Michael?
Nothing public.
I am releasing Saint in the Cellar sometime this month. And that's about a little boy who is either very lost in his own imagination or is experiencing something very amazing. It's been a fun book to write. This little boy has these very busy, preoccupied parents, and all sorts of interesting things start to happen. And then my husband and I have Wordsmiths in a Wolfhound on YouTube, and we continue to put out videos about our ongoing projects with chickens and goats. And that should be interesting as we start actually getting the animals.
All right. Who's our guest next time?
I know I say this every month, but I mean it sincerely every month. I'm excited about the upcoming guest, if for no other reason than her Scottish accent. As you know, I've been to Scotland a few times researching my books, and I, of course, am in love with the accent. So Loretta Livingstone is a British author. She lives in Scotland, though, unless I'm completely wrong about that. She lives with her husband in a beautiful area of the Chiltern. She has written fiction and poetry collections. Her first foray into the world of fiction was her novelette, Where Angels Tread, a story about a young homeless girl. All proceeds from this book are donated to a charity for the homeless, and her most recent published books is actually a time travel, medieval time slip trilogy. So in a way, it's like mine and a bit like yours, Linda. Mm-hmm. And it's called Blossom on the Thorn, and that one is actually the third in her Out of Time series. And the first novel was it was shortlisted for the 2016 Historical Novel Society Indie Award. So there's some good books that I enjoyed reading.
All right, looking forward to that. I want to thank you, Linda, for tuning in, or you didn't tune in, for joining us is what you did.
It was fun. It was fun. Thank you for having me. I really had a good time.
Thank you for joining us and sharing your words. I want to thank all of you out there, the 6.5 million folks, for tuning in. This has been episode 38 of the Books and Blues podcast. Cheers.